Celtic and Rangers are the biggest clubs in Scotland and dominate the league. But could they do it in the English Premier League? So I've moved both Celtic and Rangers into the division to answer that very question. Every club in Football Manager has a reputation out of 10,000. In simple terms, the higher the number, the bigger the club. Celtic and Rangers have reputations of 6,800, so I've swapped them with West Ham and Brighton, who have the most similar reputations in the Premier League. And then I thought about the 10 other clubs in the Scottish Premiership and how would they do. So, using the exact same reputation logic, I've swapped Aberdeen, Hibs and Hearts with Coventry, Bristol City and Sheffield Wednesday. Motherwell, Dundee, St Mirren, St Johnstone and Kilmarnock have been swapped with Reading, Barnsley, Bolton, Portsmouth and Charlton in League One. And finally, Ross County and Livingston have swapped with Wrexham and MK Dons in League 2. Will they be able to survive this? We'll take things slow to start off with to follow the early stories of all these clubs, and then we'll start to zoom into the future to find out where they end up. In Season 1, Football Manager reckons Celtic will finish 14th in the table, whilst Rangers will just avoid relegation. However, in reality, Rangers were comfortably relegated, while 16th place Celtic were 11 points away from the relegation zone. Rangers initially had a decent start to the season, but their 1-0 win over Palace in November was the last win of the season, as it all went downhill. Danilo actually had a pretty good season for them with his 15 goals in all competitions. But as you can see, there is a distinct lack of assists across the board, meaning the team isn't creative enough and the goals are scored from lucky deflections, defensive errors or individual brilliance. Celtic on the other hand had an okay start to the season, but crucially picked up wins against teams below them, which is what secured their Premier League survival despite a pretty dismal second half of the season. They had 3 players with 10 plus goals in all competitions who are also assisting each other, which seems to be the big difference between the two sides. In the Championship, Aberdeen and Hearts are destined for relegation, whilst Hibs should be okay for safety. In reality, Aberdeen did finish rock bottom, but Hibs and Hearts both secured 51 points and were well away from the relegation zone. In League 1, St Mirren and Motherwell should be around the playoffs, while St Johnstone, Kilmarnock and Dundee shouldn't be too far behind. However, it was actually St Johnstone and Dundee who made the playoffs. Kilmarnock and Motherwell finished mid-table, and St Mirren, who were predicted a playoff finish, wound up in 23rd place and relegated. After a slow August, the season actually started off pretty well for them, but form went downhill in December and never really recovered. In League 2, Livingston and Ross County are predicted to be in the automatic places, and Livingston do indeed get themselves automatic promotion, whilst Ross County do enough in the playoffs to beat Forest Green Rovers in the final. But what about the teams in Scotland? Well, we've created a new Celtic and Rangers with Brighton and West Ham, who have dominated everyone else. Bolton have overperformed in 3rd place, and Portsmouth may have underperformed by finishing in 11th. So I am really interested to see how this league developed alongside our Scottish clubs in England. But in Season 2, things are about to get very good for Celtic, as they finish 10th in the division and qualify for the Europa Conference League. That's because they beat Southampton on penalties to win the League Cup. They spent £45 million this past season, notably on Facundo Buonanotte from Brighton, who went on to score 7 goals and get 10 assists in all competitions. Seems like a pretty good signing to me. We'll keep track on him and Celtic in Europe next season. Rangers will be joining them in the Premier League next season as well, as they clinch the Championship title. Interestingly, they actually spent more than Celtic and brought in some really good young players like Joe Gelhardt, Archie Gray and Alvaro Fernandez. But Myron van Berderode on loan from PSV scored them the most goals. They will certainly miss him next season. Back to the table, and Hibs improved slightly to 17th place, but Hearts are rock bottom of the table by 16 points and will get relegated. Now, this isn't because Hearts are a bad team, it's because they've got Frank Lampard as their manager. The only thing worse than that would be Steven Gerrard. In League 1, Motherwell lift the title, whilst Aberdeen just miss out on the playoffs. Kilmarnock, Livingston and Ross County all finish mid-table, St Johnstone just avoid relegation, and Dundee get relegated after reaching the playoffs last season. It's really impressive actually, because they added a bunch of players in on loan and barely sold anyone. So it's pretty much the same team as last season, but it's all gone horribly wrong. As for St Mirren in League 2, well, they miss out on a playoff spot by goal difference. Going north of the border, this time West Ham win the title ahead of Brighton, but the teams 3rd to 5th have picked up more points than they did last season. So maybe over time, this league will start to balance out. Both Brighton and West Ham reached the Champions League phase, but got knocked out, finishing outside the top 24. So let's find out if Celtic can do any better in the Conference League in Season 3. Well, they got through the qualifying round with relative ease, and the league phase went pretty well, despite a draw with Coventry, who qualified for the competition by finishing 4th in Scotland last season, but ended up losing to Valencia in the round of 16 on penalties. But they won't be too upset about it, as they once again improve in the Premier League and are knocking on the door of the European places. Rangers also had a good season, as they finished in 14th in their first season back. They were helped by wonderkid Matias Arezzo, who they signed over summer, and they now have a nice squad playing a 4-4-2. But for me, Celtic's team is just better, as their front four in a 4-2-3-1 just love to score goals. They were almost joined by Hibs, who ended up losing in the Championship playoff final to Sunderland after finishing 6th in the table. Motherwell were only 4 points away from the relegation zone, but it's not bad for their first season in the league. In League 1 though, Livingston continue their march up the tables with another promotion as they lift the title ahead of 3rd place Kilmarnock, who lost in the playoffs. St Johnstone, Hearts and Aberdeen all finish in the top half, with Ross County in 17th place, comfortably away from the relegation zone. And this time, St Mirren top the League 2 table, meaning all Scottish sides will be in at least League 1. So far, things are going very well for our Scottish clubs. As for our technically new Scottish clubs, West Ham go back-to-back with 99 points, and Coventry are closing the gap to the top 2. Interestingly, Queen's Park and Dundee are in the division. In the Scottish Championship, Wrexham can't get back up, but Barnsley did win the title. So as things seem to be going well across the board, I think it's time we zoom into the future to Season 10. Celtic have finished in 14th place, and Rangers get relegated in 18th. But Aberdeen are the surprise package as they finish 16th. It's the Dons' second season in the league, so they've done very well to maintain themselves in the division. From the few real-life players that are still left in the database, they have Diogo Dalot, but at 34 years old, isn't really what they need. Rangers have spent more time in the Premier League than in the Championship, but they have suffered a few relegations. The only silver lining is every time they go down, they bounce back immediately by winning the title. They still have Joe Gelhardt in the team, who's been a reliable striker pretty much every single season for them, aside from this past season where his 9 goals weren't enough to keep Rangers in the league. Celtic, on the other hand, have remained in the Premier League for all 10 seasons and had a highest finish of 8th place. Their captain is Facundo Buonanotte, who is still part of the team and has achieved some pretty decent average ratings across his time in Glasgow. He's also helped them win something. Celtic overcame Lustenau, Lille, Frankfurt and finally PAOK to lift the 2032 Conference League title, with of course Buonanotte scoring in the final, which was held in Wrexham. This isn't actually Wrexham's stadium, it's just a 40,700 seater stadium that has been built in Wrexham called Wrexham Community Stadium, but no teams reside there. It's just used for the Champions League, World Cup, Europa League and Conference League. Wrexham are still at the racecourse grounds, and whilst we're here, they are currently 6th in the Premiership, as Brighton have dominated the title this season as they trade blows with West Ham, who have had a very poor season this year, only finishing in 4th. Looking into the Championship, it's not been a good season as Motherwell and Hearts both suffer relegations, leaving 16th place Hibs as the only Scottish side in England's 2nd division. Hibs have twice had playoff campaigns but failed to capitalise and make it to the Premier League, but at least they are an established Championship side. Hearts have also had one playoff appearance in the Championship, but again failed to win it, and are now headed for their second spell in League 1. Motherwell started in League 1 and have done very well to maintain themselves mostly in the Championship for the first 10 seasons. Dundee have won the League 1 title and will head to the Championship for the first time. Ross County missed out on promotion in the playoffs, whereas Livingston just missed out on a playoff spot. However, St Mirren have finished rock bottom of the table and will be heading back to League 2. There, they will turn into the second lowest ranked Scottish side, as St Johnstone triumphed in the playoffs, beating Wycombe Wanderers in extra time in the final. But Kilmarnock are the lowest ranked Scottish side, as they sit in the National League, losing in the playoff final to Scunthorpe. Having finished as high as third in League One, they've since suffered back-to-back relegations after the club went into administration in 2029. They are managed by Ryan Lowe though, who was also in charge of St Johnstone at one point. I definitely feel like he is managing far too low down. So let's go ahead to season 25, where Aberdeen are the highest ranked Scottish side as they sit 11th in the Premier League, a whole 8 points ahead of Celtic in 15th, and Rangers are nowhere to be seen. Life in the Premier League has been pretty stable for Aberdeen, other than a slight trip into the Championship. Sadly, there are no trophies won just yet. Celtic have had one relegation, but bounced straight back up after winning the playoffs, and have since finished as high as 6th place in the Premier League. They also managed to win 2 FA Cups in a row in the mid-2040s to add to their Carabao Cup and Conference League wins. They also made the Europa League final in 2044, but lost the match to Real Betis. But they did manage to win a second Conference League in 2040, beating Espanyol in the final 2 years after they lost the final in 2038 to Real Sociedad. Celtic just love coming up against Spanish teams in cup finals. In the Championship, Rangers have just lost the playoff final to Notts County, which is a monumental effort by the Magpies. Motherwell and Kilmarnock are both sat in the mid-table. Motherwell certainly feel like a Rotherham United, as they're probably too good for League One, but not really good enough for the Championship. But after being the lowest ranked Scottish side 15 seasons ago, Killie have had a superb rise and are maintaining themselves in the Championship. Incredibly, they're on their 13th manager since we saw Ryan Lowe in charge 15 seasons ago, which is an incredible turnover given the success they've had in that time. At this point, Rangers haven't been in the Premier League for a decade, despite finishing in the playoffs for 7 seasons in a row. It's certainly a tough time for them, especially when they can see Celtic doing so well. Hibs will make it 4 Scottish sides in the Championship next season, as they lift the League One title. Dundee sit in 11th place, ahead of Livingston in 14th and St Johnstone, who are getting relegated, as they finished 12 points away from safety. They'll be the only Scottish side in League 2 next season, as Hearts win automatic promotion. But things have gotten bad for Ross County. They've just been relegated from the National League and will play in England's 6th tier next season. The drop has been incredibly quick, after being a yo-yo team between League One and the Championship for a good decade. But they aren't quite as bad as St Mirren, who are 4th in the National League North. Their drop-off started quite a long time ago, and at one point it did look like they were going to get back into the Football League, but then it all fell apart again. Aside from Reading in Season 10, West Ham and Brighton have come first or second every single season. And it's no different this year, as West Ham lift the title to qualify for the Champions League. West Ham have once reached the Champions League quarter-final in 2040, where they lost to Real Madrid. The furthest Brighton got was the exact same season, when they lost in the round of 16 to West Ham. But Brighton did win the 2042 Europa League, so there has been some European success in Scotland. By season 50, there has been a big change in the Premier League, as Rangers are now the highest ranked Scottish side in 12th place, as Celtic face relegation in 19th. It turns out Rangers have been established in the Premier League for 2 decades now, finishing twice in 7th place. In the mid-2060s, the team was good enough to win 2 Conference League titles, and more recently, they just won their first FA Cup against Chelsea. Celtic are nowhere to be seen in either competition, but Aberdeen did make the FA Cup final in 2066. Celtic, on the other hand, have turned into a yo-yo club, but did have a sustained 8-year stint in the Premier League before getting relegated this season. Since we saw them last, they have won nothing. In the Championship, Hibs have just lost the playoff final to Southend United, who have had a miraculous turnaround in the last 50 years after being on the brink of extinction. Aberdeen finished 9 points outside the playoffs in 10th place, and they're the only two Scottish sides in the Championship. Hibs have had one season in the Premier League after dipping down to the National League for a season, but other than 2 League One titles, they've not won anything. Aberdeen finished in a high of 7th place in the Premier League, but have spent more time recently in the Championship. They made the final of the FA Cup as we saw earlier on, but it's the only cup final that they've made. Motherwell will be joining them next season as they get promoted from League One, whilst Hearts finish in the middle of the table. Motherwell are actually a solid Championship side. This was their first season in the last 20 years in League One, whereas Hearts have maintained themselves as mostly a League One side over the same time period. They have also won 2 Bristol Street Motors trophies, which is a highly prestigious award. But only Kilmarnock in 9th place reside in League 2, meaning 5 of our Scottish teams are no longer in the Football League. Killie are mostly a League One side, with ventures outside of the league both up and down. Ross County and St Johnstone are both in the top flight of non-league football, in 13th and 18th respectively. Ross County have been a non-league side for the last 20 seasons, but they generally are trending upwards. However, this is the first season in non-league football for St Johnstone in the past 20 seasons, and given they just came 18th, suggests they aren't adjusting very well. That leaves Dundee, St Mirren and Livingston in the National League North, but at least Dundee are escaping. 20 seasons ago, they were in the Championship, so have had a dramatic and hard fall in that time. St Mirren have been a non-league club for the last 20 seasons, mostly in the National League North, whilst Livingston haven't quite spent as much time in non-league football, but they are nearing on 20 seasons and don't look like escaping anytime soon. You will be delighted to hear that Brighton have won 26 Scottish Premiership titles, whilst West Ham have won the other 24 from our 50 years simulation. But interestingly, there are 4 actual Scottish teams in this division. Charlton, Wrexham and Sheffield Wednesday have dropped down into the 2nd division, and Bolton lost in the playoffs in the 3rd division. Now, of course, we are dealing with a whole load of hypothetical situations when we go 50 years in the future in Football Manager. Personally, I don't think Bolton would drop down to the 3rd division of Scottish football, and I certainly don't think that there would be 5 Scottish clubs in non-league football. If Scottish clubs did move to England, I genuinely think all of them would be able to establish themselves as pretty decent League One and Championship sides, aside from Celtic and Rangers, who I think would be in the lower half of the Premier League table. Although if that does happen, Celtic and Liverpool fans may start a riot over who can sing You'll Never Walk Alone. Speaking of which, Jurgen Klopp is leaving Liverpool, so in this video on screen, I've replaced him with 5 likely candidates in Football Manager to find out which one of them would have the most success with Liverpool. The best manager may well just surprise you.